Hello, everyone, Bible believers around the world, and we're back more with the East Asian Yafeth connection. Now, this is going to be something that I know a lot of us Israelites have been frustrated about and have had to deal with ourselves in the past, but we're actually starting to become hypocritical, a lot of us. And what we're going to be exposing here is the narrative that dark skin tones equals Hamitic ancestry. And we're going to get into where this myth started, where this myth even came from, because there's people out there who are pushing the false East Asians are Hamites doctrine, and what they say is, they used to be black, so those are their Hamite ancestors. But we've already exposed that the ancient black indigenous Asians are not even of the same ethnic stock as the modern ones you'd be seeing doing K-pop and in world governments. But then they take a counterattack, these people. What they do is, then they move on to this straight up modern East Asians who get tan after being in the sun. And they say, see, the fact that their skin tans is proof of Hamitic ancestry. But is that really true? Because what they're really saying is that dark skin equals Hamite ancestors. Does dark skin really only come from Ham? And if your skin darkens in the sun, or if you already have a naturally dark skin tone, does that mean that you are tied to the sons and daughters of Ham in some shape, fashion, or form? Let's get into this, because this is exactly what they've been doing. One of the things they've been doing to try and, push the East Asians the modern East Asians are descendants of Ham thing. They first try and bring up the ancient black East Asians, but as you've already covered, they're not even the same ethnic stock and predate the modern East Asians, who are actually Yaphetic and are brothers to the Europeans. So when that fails, they move on to talking about this straight up skin color, and they say, see, the modern ones, they turn to dark brown after being in the sun. So see, they're Ham. The sun is exposing them right now. Their Hamite ancestors are coming out with that sun. Let's expose this. Dark skin is a trait of humanity, not just Ham. That's right. Many Bible scholars during the Many European Bible scholars during the 20th century falsely wrote in their books that Ham is the progenitor of all the dark-skinned races of people. And it's this error from the old scholars that's still causing problems today, because now many people try and link anyone who has a dark skin tone to being a descendant of Ham. And that's the same problem that all of us Afro-Asiatic people has been having, no matter if you're Israelite, no matter if you're Edomite, Moabite, Ammonite, Ishmaelite. This false doctrine that was started by those European scholars centuries ago, when they claimed Ham is the progenitor of all the dark-skinned races of people, makes people call us Ham. So you're really a Shemitic Edomite, you're really a Shemitic Israelite, you're really a Shemitic Moabite, but you get called Ham because you're so-called black. You're dark-skinned, you're Ham. When that was never the case. The Bible does not separate people on skin tones. It separates people based on bloodlines. And we're going to learn that it's completely foolish to say that dark skin equals Hamitic ancestry, because every nation started off with dark skin. So that means every nation today, every modern ethnicity of people today has their own dark-skinned ancestors that are completely independent, completely separate of Hamitic peoples. All right? Let's get started. The idea that dark skin or the ability to tan is a result of Hamite ancestors is completely false and is debunked by scripture and science. Science has confirmed that all human populations originally started off dark-skinned in the beginning, and this is key for multiple reasons. For starters, it debunks the idea that dark skin tones are a Hamitic-only trait, because the truth is it's a trait of all of humanity. Furthermore, this also shows that all humans alive today have their own dark-skinned ancestors that are completely separate from the descendants of Ham, Africans. The dark skin means Hamitic origin myth, started by old European scholars centuries ago, is strongly responsible for the false teaching that says the modern East Asians are Hamites, because the people who teach it try to use old photographs from the 20th century of Asians with dark skin and African features as proof that modern East Asians are Hamites. But this doctrine falls apart quickly when viewed under a microscope. One of the first holes in trying to use old photographs of dark-skinned Asians with African features to prove that modern East Asians are Hamitic is the fact that the ancient black Asians known as Negritos and Jomon not only predate the modern East Asians, but are of a completely different ethnic stock. Yep, we mentioned that. The modern East Asians you see today are Yephethites, brothers to the Europeans, who migrated from Eurasia to East Asia thousands of years after the black indigenous Asians were already there. Yet we covered that in a previous lesson. Furthermore, as we've already covered, every human was dark-skinned at one point. So the way you identify people is by Y-DNA haplogroups and phenotypes, because even photos that show modern East Asians with darker skin tones aren't proof they are Hamites, because Ham isn't the only source of dark skin, as even the earliest Europeans, Yefeth, were dark-skinned. Exactly. This doctrine falls apart quickly when you learn that the ancestors of the so-called white man were actually dark-skinned. And I'm not talking about Moors now. People, when you say black Europeans or dark-skinned Europeans, people assume you're talking about the Moors or the scattered Israelites or Hamites. No, I'm talking about the Yephetic Caucasian peoples. Their ancestors 3,000 years ago were dark-skinned. This is what white people look like 3,000 years ago. Swarthy. All right? European features and swarthy skin. So based on the Hamitic lie that the Europeans started, they would be of Hamitic stock because their ancestors look like this. All right? This is what white people used to look like. Eurocentric features and swarthy skin. The ancient Europeans looked like what the Indians look like today, basically. We've covered this in the Indian-European connection in the past. So, dark skin is not a Hamitic only feature, because everybody was dark-skinned on this earth at one point, but yet we were still our own separate people. So trying to identify people based on skin tone has never worked. Scripture, DNA, migration patterns, and historical sources prove that the modern haplogroup O Asians are Yefeth and are genetic family to the Europeans, not the Israelites or Hamites. Yet we have already covered that in the biblical origins of the modern East Asian peoples lesson. So go check that out. So I just wanted to put this out there because this is something us Israelites have struggled with for decades. And now people trying to use it to strip the Yephetic identity away from the modern East Asians, calling them Ham. And I put this image together. This is exactly what we have happening. We have these two Korean women who got dark after being in the sun. They lost their pale complexion because the sun tanned them. And you have, Hebrew women like, see, you're Hamites. Like, brothers and sisters, we need, we're getting caught up. We're starting to throw the same net on people that was thrown on us to try and call us Ham. It's just completely not accurate. Skin color makes no sense. You can't identify people based on skin color because at one point everybody on this earth was dark, but yet everybody was still their own ethnicity. So let's go back in time 2,000 years ago, when white people looked like this, and naturally, everybody else was dark too. How do we tell each other apart? Did we just all identify as Hamites back then? No, we didn't. And getting back into, modern East Asians tanning, we've already, closed this out. But it's like, that's why the DNA and the phenotype is all that matters. Because we've already debunked and exposed that the ancient indigenous black Asians are a completely separate ethnic stock. We've already exposed that. But talking about the modern East Asians, when they turn brown, they still have the Eurocentric features. They still have the straight hair, the narrow noses, and the thin lips. So it's basically like these people right here. What's going on the screen? Okay, here we go. I would hope nobody would accuse these people of being Hamites or think they're African, because these are literally just straight up Europeans with brown skin. All right. So that's the same thing with the modern East Asians, where the modern East Asians, when they turn brown after being in the sun, they still don't look like the indigenous Asians. They don't have, they still lack the afros, the skull shape, the body build, the lips. They're just brown. They're still the same. They're just brown. So the idea that skin color changes who you are, it's like you could turn my skin pale white and I would not look like a Yephetic, a European. I would not look like a Yephethite from the European branch. I wouldn't. And you could, give my skin complexion to a Yephethite man from the European branch, and he would not look like me, because color is not everything. Now, bye for now.